There is one detail about the day you first met this person that you were never supposed to know. You remember that day one way. They remember it completely differently. And now, after keeping this secret buried for longer than they ever expected, they are getting dangerously close to telling you what actually happened. Because your first meeting was not as ordinary to them as it may have seemed to you. Something happened before you arrived. Something happened the moment they saw you. And something happened after you walked away that changed the way they thought about you forever. The strangest part? You may have noticed a tiny piece of it without realizing what it meant. Maybe it was the way they suddenly became quiet. Maybe they looked at you longer than necessary and then quickly looked away. Maybe their voice changed. Maybe they seemed nervous, distracted, unusually serious, or strangely familiar with you. At the time, you probably dismissed it. But they didn't. They went home thinking about it. And what they did next is the secret. Stay with this message, because when you understand what happened during those first few moments, you may finally understand why this connection has felt so complicated ever since. This person remembers exactly what you were wearing. They remember where you were standing. They remember the first expression on your face. They even remember something you said that you probably forgot within minutes. But that isn't the shocking part. The shocking part is that they already knew something about you before the two of you properly met. Not everything. Not your entire story. But enough to make seeing you in person feel completely different. Your name may have already crossed their path. Someone may have mentioned you. They may have seen your picture. They may have heard a story involving you. Or perhaps they had simply noticed you from a distance before you ever noticed them. So while you believed that moment was the beginning, for them, the story had already started. And they never told you. Imagine what that means. The first time you looked into their eyes, they were processing information you didn't have. That's why their reaction may have seemed unusual. They weren't only meeting you. They were comparing the real you to the version of you they had already formed in their mind. And something didn't match. You were not what they expected. You were more difficult to ignore. More natural. More intriguing. And perhaps more emotionally dangerous to them than they had prepared themselves for. They had expected a normal introduction. Instead, something inside them shifted. They tried to hide it. They told themselves, "This means nothing." But later that night, your face came back into their mind. Then your voice. Then the smallest details. And eventually they asked themselves a question they would never have admitted to you. Why did meeting this person affect me so much? That question became the beginning of the secret. Because this person did something after your first meeting. Something they have never admitted. They tried to find out more about you. Maybe they asked someone a carefully disguised question. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would reveal their interest. Something casual like, "Who was that?" Or, "How do you know them?" Or perhaps they searched your name privately. They wanted information without anyone realizing why they wanted it. And when they found something, their curiosity became stronger. But then came the twist. They discovered something that made them believe getting close to you could become complicated. Maybe you appeared unavailable. Maybe they assumed someone else already had your heart. Maybe they heard something about your past. Maybe the circumstances around you seemed too difficult. Or maybe they realized that liking you could interfere with another relationship, friendship, expectation, or promise in their life. So they made a decision. They would keep their distance. They would act normal. They would never let you know how strongly that first encounter had affected them. And for a while, they succeeded. At least, that's what they thought. But feelings have strange ways of escaping through behavior. They remembered things you told them. They noticed when your mood changed. They became unusually aware of who was around you. They noticed who made you laugh. They noticed when someone else gave you attention. And whenever you disappeared for a while, they wondered where you had gone. Still, they kept the biggest truth hidden. Because there was another moment during your first meeting that you may have completely missed. Someone else noticed their reaction to you. Yes. A third person saw it. They noticed the sudden change in their face. They noticed the attention. And later, when you were no longer around, this person said something that made them panic. Something like, "You like them, don't you?" They denied it immediately. Too quickly. And that denial became almost funny because the person asking could already see the answer. From that moment, your person became even more careful. They didn't want anyone exposing something they had barely admitted to themselves. So whenever your name came up, they acted indifferent. Sometimes almost too indifferent. And if you've ever wondered why this person occasionally behaved colder than their true feelings seemed to justify, this could explain it. Distance was safer than exposure. Silence was safer than confession. Because the more they learned about you, the harder it became to treat you like everyone else. But there is still something deeper. The secret isn't simply that they were attracted to you from the beginning. That would be too easy. The real secret involves what happened just before the meeting. On that day, this person had been thinking seriously about changing something in their life. They were tired. Emotionally exhausted. Maybe disappointed by someone. Maybe questioning love completely. Maybe promising themselves they would stop chasing connections that went nowhere. They were entering a phase where they wanted peace instead of emotional confusion. And then you appeared. The timing disturbed them. Because you arrived almost immediately after they had decided they didn't want to feel anything complicated. They may even have joked privately that life had terrible timing. But there was nothing funny about what happened afterward. Because the more they tried to forget the encounter, the more details returned. Your eyes. Your mannerisms. Your confidence. Your awkwardness. Your kindness. Maybe something imperfect about you that strangely made you even more memorable. And one sentence in particular. You said something that touched an insecurity they had never told you about. You weren't trying to. You probably didn't even know. But your words landed directly on something they had been struggling with privately. Perhaps you encouraged them without realizing it. Perhaps you said something funny at exactly the moment they needed to laugh. Perhaps you treated them with respect when they had recently felt invisible. Or perhaps you simply looked at them without judgment. That tiny moment stayed with them. And they never told you. Weeks or months may have passed, but whenever they thought about when everything changed, their mind returned to that day. Your first meeting. That's why they remember details you don't. For you, the meaning developed later. For them, the meaning started almost immediately. But then something went wrong. Fear entered. They started questioning whether what they felt was mutual. Every interaction became evidence. If you were warm, they wondered if you liked them. If you were distant, they convinced themselves they had imagined everything. If you laughed with someone else, jealousy appeared. If you gave them attention, hope returned. It became exhausting. And because they didn't want you to know how vulnerable they had become, they began controlling what they showed. This is where many misunderstandings began. There were moments when they wanted to say more and stopped themselves. Messages they almost sent. Questions they wanted to ask. Invitations they imagined making. Confessions they rehearsed privately. And one particular conversation that came incredibly close to changing everything. They had decided they would finally tell you something. Maybe not the entire truth. Just enough to see how you reacted. But before they could do it, something happened. Your mood changed. Someone interrupted. A misunderstanding occurred. Or they heard something that made them believe the timing was wrong. So once again, they swallowed the truth. And the secret grew heavier. But now, something is different. They are tired of carrying the version of the story where you don't know what your first meeting really meant to them. Because there is one question they desperately want answered. Did you feel something that day too? They have wondered about this more times than you realize. They've replayed your expression. Your body language. The way you responded to them. They've searched their memory for evidence. Was that smile ordinary? Did you look back? Did your voice change too? Did you remember them afterward? They want to know whether they were alone in what they experienced. And this is where the secret becomes even more surprising. There may be something they kept from that day. Not necessarily an object. A memory. A message. A screenshot. A photograph. A conversation. Maybe someone texted them afterward asking about you. Maybe they wrote something about you privately. Maybe they saved your name somewhere. Maybe there is still evidence showing exactly when their interest began. And if you ever saw it, you would know they couldn't pretend anymore. Because it has a date. The day you met. Imagine discovering that this person had been thinking about you far longer than you believed. Imagine hearing them say, "I need to tell you something about the first day I saw you." That sentence alone could rewrite everything. Because you would suddenly understand certain moments that never made sense. Why they pulled away. Why they returned. Why they watched you so carefully. Why they sometimes seemed jealous without having the right to be jealous. Why they remembered tiny things. Why your presence could change their mood. Why they could never completely treat you casually. But there is another layer they are almost afraid to admit. They judged you incorrectly at first. Yes. For a brief moment, they assumed something about you that wasn't true. Maybe they thought you would be arrogant. Maybe difficult. Maybe uninterested. Maybe emotionally unavailable. Maybe they believed something another person had said. And then you destroyed that assumption simply by being yourself. That's part of why you became unforgettable. They expected one person and encountered another. And privately, they felt guilty. Because whatever they had heard or assumed didn't match the person standing in front of them. That guilt may be one reason they've wanted to confess. They want you to know that their opinion of you changed almost instantly. And there's one more truth. The person who originally told them about you may not have described you fairly. Perhaps jealousy was involved. Perhaps misunderstanding. Perhaps someone had their own reason for controlling how you were perceived. Your person eventually realized this. But by then, the situation had become complicated. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting they had been curious about you before you even knew. So they stayed silent. Until now. Something recently reminded them of that first day. A place. A song. A photograph. A date. A conversation. Someone mentioning your name. And suddenly, the memory came rushing back with uncomfortable clarity. They remembered what they felt. And more importantly, they realized how much time has passed. That's what is pushing them toward confession. They don't want this secret becoming one of those truths that gets revealed years too late. They don't want you discovering it from somebody else. Because remember that third person? The one who noticed their reaction. They still know. And there is a chance they know even more now. Your person understands that secrets become harder to control when other people are involved. So they are thinking about telling you themselves. But they don't know how you'll respond. Will you laugh? Will you be shocked? Will you say you already knew? Or will you reveal that you felt something too? That final possibility is the one they can't stop imagining. Because if you admit that the day affected you as well, everything between you suddenly gains a different meaning. Two people may have spent all this time protecting themselves from the same truth. Two people pretending. Two people waiting for evidence. Two people remembering the same beginning from opposite sides. And here's what they would probably tell you if fear disappeared tonight. I noticed you before you noticed me. I knew something about you before we spoke. I tried not to be interested. I asked about you afterward. I thought about you when I got home. I was scared you would realize. And I have remembered that day ever since. But even those words don't contain the deepest part. Because there was a moment after you left when this person made a prediction about you. They told themselves that you would probably disappear from their life. That they would never see you enough for anything meaningful to happen. They assumed you would become another passing face. Yet somehow, you didn't. Your story kept crossing theirs. And every time it did, the original feeling returned. That's what scared them most. They could explain attraction. They could explain curiosity. What they couldn't explain was why the connection refused to become irrelevant. Even during distance. Even during silence. Even when both of you were focused elsewhere. Something about the memory remained unfinished. And unfinished stories create questions. Your person has been carrying one for a long time. What would have happened if I had been honest from the beginning? Think about that. How different would everything have been if they had told you after the first meeting that you stayed on their mind? How many misunderstandings could have been avoided? How many nights of wondering? How many unnecessary walls? They know this too. And regret is beginning to overpower fear. But the confession may not arrive dramatically. It might begin casually. They may bring up the past. Do you remember when we first met? Pay attention if those words ever come. Because what follows could be much bigger than nostalgia. They may ask what you remember. They may test your memory first. They want to know whether that day mattered to you before exposing how much it mattered to them. And if you answer with a detail they didn't expect you to remember, you could completely destroy their defenses. Because secretly, they want proof that they weren't alone. But there is one last secret about that day. One they have protected more carefully than everything else. When they first saw you, there was a strange moment of recognition. Not recognition because they literally knew you. Something harder to explain. You felt familiar. Your presence felt strangely comfortable and unsettling at the same time. They couldn't understand why. And because they are rational enough to question their own emotions, they pushed the feeling away. But it returned whenever they saw you again. That's why this story isn't simply about attraction. It's about recognition. About meeting someone and feeling as though the introduction came later than the connection. They have never known how to explain that without sounding foolish. So they didn't. They hid it behind ordinary behavior. Behind jokes. Distance. Silence. Maybe even arguments. But the truth remained. The day you first met became a private landmark in their life. Before you. After you. They know exactly where the line is. And now they are approaching the moment when hiding it may feel harder than revealing it. Because another change is coming. This person is considering doing something that would make their feelings much more difficult to deny. A conversation. A message. An invitation. Or finally telling you what happened after you walked away that first day. And when they do, there is one sentence you may hear that changes your understanding of everything. I never told you this, but I already knew who you were. If those words come, listen carefully to what follows. Because the story behind them involves another person, a private conversation, and a choice they made before your relationship had even properly begun. And that choice may be the real reason your connection took the complicated path it did. They thought staying silent would protect them. Instead, silence created the mystery you've both been living inside. But secrets eventually reach a point where they demand a decision. Keep hiding them and risk losing the person forever. Or speak and risk changing everything. Your person is reaching that point. And they know once they tell you what happened on the day you first met, they can never return to pretending it meant nothing. Because it meant something. Far earlier than you knew. Far more deeply than they admitted. And possibly to both of you. The first meeting wasn't the secret. Their reaction to you was. What they learned before meeting you was. What they did afterward was. And the person who witnessed everything may be holding the final piece. Because there was a conversation about you that happened after you left. A conversation your person never expected you to hear about. And what they said during that conversation reveals exactly how they felt before fear, distance, pride, and confusion entered the story. They said something about you that they have never had the courage to say directly to your face. Something so honest that even the person listening was stunned. And now, after all this time, those exact words are dangerously close to reaching you.